Welcome to the Soul Patch Podcast, the podcast where three American expats explore different topics related to living and working in South Korea. With a combined 50 years of living experience in Asia, there are plenty of stories to tell. So, pop in your AirPods and make yourself comfortable. It's time for the Soul Patch Podcast.
So, as anyone who has spent any amount of time in Korea knows, of course, there's a lot of English these days in Korean, right? I mean, there's so much, and it's interesting when we start looking at what's the difference between Konglish and just English and what's Korean. But there's so much English in Korean, and we'll talk about that. I want to get to that in a little bit. But the reason I want to talk about this is because not only is there a lot of English in Korean, but English, a language famous for taking everything from everywhere, has just this year, officially, according to the Oxford Dictionary, added 26 Korean words, one of the first times, which is kind of cool that Korean is officially becoming English at this point. There's official words. I'm curious, do you guys want to try and guess what some of the words are that have become English? What words do you think are Korean?
One of them's got to be K-pop, right? I mean,
yeah, so one of them is just the K something. So
okay,
the
K-drama,
itself,
K-pop,
no, actually,
something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Just K dash is one of the one that was adding. So K-pop, K-drama. Actually, K-drama is itself listed. For some reason, K-pop isn't, but K-drama is. I don't know why those are separate.
Well,
But
I mean,
yeah,
if,
so that's one.
If somebody says K-drama, we know that they're not talking about a Kazakh drama or
But
Kurdistan pop music or something like that. So
yeah, the K's
your K countries.
It's been taken.
It's been taken. That letter is spoken for. Yeah.
Yep. So that's one, is the K version. What else you got? Any other guesses?
Well, kimchi. I mean, that's got to be. That was probably already in there a long time ago.
That
right?
was probably already there because it's not on this list. So that was likely already there. But on that note, there are quite a few foods. I'll give you that hint. There are a few foods that have been mentioned. So if you want to try and guess foods.
Bibimbap.
Oh yeah, that's got to be.
Bibimbap. Actually, no, is not. That might have already have been there. I don't have a full list of everything.
Bibimbap's got to be there. What about bulgogi? I mean, bulgogi
is
there.
Yeah. Yes, bulgogi is one of them.
Galbi.
Actually, yep, that's there. Galbi's there.
Yeah.
I think bulgogi would come before bibimbap. It's like teriyaki. Like there's been bulgogi. Like bibimbap seems like a newer kind of import to the States. I don't know.
Bulgogi. I'll never forget when I was first here in Korea, and back when I knew zero Korean. I was teaching at a hagwon. One of the little kids, I was teaching a young kid hagwon, and we were talking about food. And he was like bulgogi, and I was just learning enough to know that bul meant fire and gogi meant meat. And I'll never forget this little this little elementary school kid, probably second grade or something, just in the classroom screaming fire meat, just cracking up. Once he made the connection as well.
I love the
bulgogi's in there, galbi's there.
Yeah. I mean, in the food, what about soju then?
Soju I know is not, but that was probably already there. For other foods, there's samgyeopsal and kimbap are the other foods. And japchae.
Oh, japchae. Yeah,
as well.
Right.
Interesting.
People digging into japchae.
Yeah, right. So, any other guesses?
Well, let's get outside of the domain of food. You mean okay. Well, I'm guessing the Hallyu, kind of thing.
Hallyu is one.
Yeah. So what about Gangnam? That's the name, Gangnam Style.
Because I think that's just more of a name, so it's not a word.
It's a proper noun, so it's not really. Yeah.
Although I mean, kimbap is a proper noun as well, but in this case, it's a place name as opposed to. I don't know how they decide on these words, but no, Gangnam wasn't on the list, but those are.
Okay.
One, if you watch Korean, because that Korean dramas are becoming very popular globally as well. And so a couple of interesting words, there's three, and the reason I'm pointing out that there's three is interesting is because there should be four, but for some reason one of them wasn't added. So there's three words: nuna, oppa, and unni. were added,
Oh,
which are, you know, for anyone who's listening, those are the words basically for older brother and older sister if you're a man or a woman, depending on what you say. Because, you know, there's so many, like, you know, dramas, and they're always talking to their, you know, older friends, and they use those words. And I'm really surprised that the word hyung, older brother for a man, is not in there. Yet
Yeah.
Nuna is, which is older sister for a man.
so wait, you're telling me
and
that Nuna is in now in the Oxford English Dictionary?
yes, Nuna, Opa, and Unni are all
That
in,
is
they
that's
are
really
officially
bizarre
English
to me.
words now.
Wow, those are English words now. Okay.
I know. So now when I don't have to define those anymore for our listeners because it's English. You should just know what I'm talking about at this point, right?
Yeah, you're right. What, you don't speak English? Come on, people.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's those which I think those make a lot of sense because, you know, there's dramas are going around. Mukbang is one, which I don't like the spelling of how they did that.
Yes,
MUK.
right.
I think that's weird, but whatever. So mukbang, of course, is one. Skinship, I thought was interesting. Skinship is one of the words that got
Skinship
added.
always, to me, when I heard that the first time, it sounds way dirtier than it is. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it just
Yeah.
sounds super dirty. It's like, oh man. And then you
Yeah,
find out what it is. It's like, oh, okay. It's like
The
holding hands.
definition
Right?
here is touching or close physical contact between people, and that's it. So yeah, it could be
Right,
touching
right.
hand, it could be holding hands,
Yeah,
it could
but
be just, you know, putting your hand on someone's shoulder.
this was a concept that was introduced to me when I first arrived in Korea by a foreigner. He said he was just trying to explain some of the nuances and things that were, you know, it's like week one of being on the ground. And this person had lived here for, I think, 2 years. And I wouldn't say he was like fascinated with this idea, but it was like one of his favorite concepts was skinship. It's like, well, what is that? That's the difference between like knowing somebody, like, hey, he's a really good friend, or like a friend that you would give a hug to. Like,
Oh,
there's like
I thought it was a couple thing. It's not a romantic. I thought
think
skinship was the equivalent of like PDA, public display of affection. Am I?
This is my interpretation from a guy from a decade ago, but
Right,
and maybe
yeah.
he just wanted to hug me, you know.
I think he was, yeah.
So
No. I'm sure that you're probably right too. I don't know. I
don't think it's necessarily romantic. Like,
okay.
it's kind of like when you see, okay, if you go out at night and you're in, like, if you go to like Hongdae, you'll see guys that have, you know, put a couple pints in them and they're walking like with their arms around each other's shoulders. That's not a gay couple necessarily. Probably, I don't know if to say probably, but maybe is not. Most likely not. You'll see that very often. And I was told that's a type of skinship.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I agree that is a type of skinship, but whenever I hear the word skinship used, it always seems to be between men and women only. And so maybe it depends on who you're using it. Like, I mean, that's where I get the same feeling that Jack had as well, where like two guy friends with their, you know, drinking at night and they're just like, I love you, man. Like, I agree, that feels like skinship, you know, quotation marks skinship, but I don't think that my Korean friends used it that way. Whereas, or two girls holding hands walking on the street as well. Whereas, like, you know, a couple holding hands or kissing on the corner or whatever, that would be like, oh, too much skinship for that. And I could be wrong, but that's how I've always heard it used at least. So skinship is a word.
No, I'm looking up I'm looking right now. This is Urban Dictionary, so take it with a grain of salt. And this is it says Korean. In Korea, the term skinship is used to describe the act of intimate, non-sexual touching between very close, usually same sex, but can include both genders, platonic friends. It involves acts such as holding hands, arms, hugging, and kissing on the cheek. Sometimes it even goes deeper. And it's not unusual to see Koreans walking and holding hands with each other, even if they're not in a relationship. That just means they have a deep skinship with each other.
Okay.
Oh, that's weird.
I stand
I've
corrected,
definitely
man.
I've definitely seen it used with mixed gender groups. And they're saying it's not used between mixed gender groups.
The way it said
either way.
The term is used to describe the act of intimate, non-sexual touching between very close, usually same sex, but can include both genders. Also, that's in the dictionary, so take that with a grain of salt.
No, I mean, because that makes sense, because you would see, like, for example, I had a friend who was a Chinese immigrant in Canada, And you know, in the Chinese immigrant students would walk down the hallways, you know, same-sex students would be holding hands, you know, like guys would be holding hands walking down, and the Canadian students would, you know, of course, bully them, and you know, how could you do that or whatever. And
Canadians? I thought they were nice.
well, I mean, they're high school kids, right? You know, it's like,
Oh yeah,
oh,
all
is
kids are
that your
assholes.
boyfriend or what? You know, you know, this is 10, 15 years ago when, you know, there was. So anyway, it's just like, apparently it's a word for that kind of closeness, that intimacy,
Right.
that's like non-sexual. I guess I'd always
right.
put it together as like PDA, but that must be something else then. So yeah,
That's generally how I've seen it as well, but I guess it can go either way. So then just the last couple of fun words that I think are interesting on here is Konglish, of course, is now officially a word.
okay.
But that makes sense. Fighting is now a word. But not fighting like I'm gonna fight you, or those people are fighting on the corner, but like, you know, you can do it, like fighting, the way Korean people say it.
Yeah, like let's go. Like,
Yeah.
get her done.
Yeah,
but do you have to
incitement or support?
Do you have to pronounce it the Korean way though? Do you have to say fighting?
It just says fighting. That's
okay.
it. Just fighting.
No, so like in English,
fighting.
so it's like in Korean,
Yeah,
it can be
it's
pronounced
fighting.
2 ways in Korean, right? Because it can be hwa or pa, right?
Yeah, it
Right.
could be fighting or fighting, you know.
Yeah. So, but in English, when
no F in
that
Korean.
that word got like into Korean, kind of bastardized, and now it's coming back into English.
Right.
And it's pronounced with an F in the dictionary now.
Yeah, and actually, Ryan, something that is interesting about that, my wife learned a while ago that fighting actually came into Korean not from English, but from Japanese.
Okay.
Which doesn't make any sense, because
I love it.
And we can talk about this in a minute, bit where how Korean, like now there's a lot of English coming into Korean, but it used to be a lot of Japanese coming into Korean. And I think that the Japanese, like back during wartime and stuff, or maybe even before that, before the war, they were adopting a lot more American culture at the time. And so apparently, like fighting was in Japanese, and then it came into Korean. Like actually,
so the nuance of it meaning like get her done, let's go, keep at it, like
rah rah,
that was,
you know, it's a cheer, you know. Yeah,
right. So that's Japan. That nuance comes from Japan, and then it got brought to Korea. Is that what you're saying?
Like another example of the same thing actually is the way my father-in-law, because you know, if you speak to like really older people, a lot of times they'll still have more Japanese words, and I can't think of any other examples at the moment, but I've heard a couple.
I could think of one like dak tori tang and dak bokum tang, right? Like some
maybe.
Korean people don't like to say dak tori tang because that's the Japanese word for the dish, and so they say no, you have to say dak bokum tang, you know.
There's another word that my friends would use for when a meeting, when you were done all hanging out, like when dinner was done, you'd be like, let's go. But I can't remember the word. That was a Japanese word as well. Maybe it'll come to me later. But the one that my father-in-law uses is the word for underwear. He often says pants, pantsu. And that definitely comes from the Japanese. I mean, if you ever watched any anime, and I've watched a bit of anime, One Piece is fantastic, and they often do say pantsu in there, and so that word actually came from English because pants, you know, but that moved to Japanese and then into Korean.
Also the word panty is underwear in Korean as well. Yeah,
that's all underwear in Korean, which was really weird when I went to the store and I'm like, I need underwear. They're like, oh, panties are that way. I'm like, I don't have panties. I need some boxers, bro.
As soon as I heard the word panty in Korean and I realized it just applied across the board, I just thought of like the Revenge of the Nerds or something, you know, like a panty raid, you know. It was like, it's such a like, it's almost like a sexualized word.
Another very old reference from Jack.
But so I know, there's no 80s reference left unturned. I'm aging myself here, but
the last two examples before we can move into Korean, and I think these are great ones, is Debac. You know Debac?
Debac is like cool.
It's like awesome. Like, that's awesome. Rad. That's like, Debac. Yeah, and the way it's used is it's basically just it's almost saying it to yourself. You wouldn't say like that is rad. You wouldn't say that is Debac. You would never say it that way. It's just like, oh, Debac, oh, cool. It's like you're talking to yourself, is the way that's used. And then maybe my favorite word on the list is chimek. Chimek is now an English word.
Finally,
chimek.
finally.
Wait,
chicken and beer.
I'm having a chimek. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's worth talking about in the podcast here for listeners. So for people that are kind of new to the language, or maybe that's why you've tuned in, new to the language, new to the culture. One thing Korea is excellent at, and I love this. Some people don't. They think it's kind of like breaking language, but you guys already know what I'm going to say. Like Korea will invent a word when there isn't a word. Yeah. And people will support that very quickly. And it's usually taking, like if you have a 2-syllable word and a 2-syllable word, you just grab 1 syllable from the first word, 1 syllable from the other word, and you smash that baby together. And you got
a portmanteau. Is that I believe is what the
I think it's
right? Yeah.
Portmanteau. Yeah. That's actually, that's kind of funny. My family was just asking me about this because I've got a cousin who's in high school now, and so I was talking to my aunt, and she was like, "Oh, there's all these crazy slang words. Like, you know what this means and this means, and it's all these crazy stuff." And it's interesting how English slang is often using a word that already exists but giving it different meaning. Like for me, my generation, we would say like, "Oh, that's sick." Right. And of course, if you say something is sick, like that's, my grandmother would be like, "Oh, sick. Oh, are you okay?" And sick to my generation.
And then you say, "No, grandma, it's dope." And then she's like,
right.
"What did you call me?" Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. And so English often takes words and just gives it a new meaning, whereas Korean does exactly what Ryan said. And they take like, so chimek is chicken, so chi, and beer is maekju, so chi mek. They take those first 2 syllables. I actually just learned a new one tonight. My wife's cousin was up, and apparently this is already an old generation. This is from the people born in the 90s, and the cousin is born in the 2000s. So this is already an old slang, but it was 혼자 time. You need alone time. 혼자 time. 혼자. And it's just another example. 혼자 time. And there's a great example of English in Korean, actually. And now that I think about it, that's probably a good transition for moving over into talking about Konglish at this point.
But wait,
and this is something.
Sorry. No, I was going to go back to Ryan's point. Is that I think the thing that's kind of funny about it is that you're exactly right. They grab the first syllable, but they don't. I think we gravitate towards the root, right? Like, what's the Latin root? If we're going to put 2 words together, we're going to kind of mix the roots. But in Korea, I don't think there's any the connection to the Latin root. The perfect
example of a portmanteau in English is brunch. And that's actually the opposite, because that's brunch, breakfast, the first, and then unch, it's the second half of the syllable.
Right.
We would never do brille, which is how they would do it in English.
Right.
Like breakfast, lunch. And actually they do that in Korean. Ajum. Ajum is brunch, and that's achim and jumshin, and that's the first syllable of each of those.
Yeah, there you go. Well, what about like peachy? Do you know peachy? Pizza,
in English or Korean?
Pizza and chicken. You can order half pizza and they call it peachy. Yeah, which is a whole.
I know
which is so confusing because that's like an actual fruit. Like, no, I don't want a peach. No, I mean pizza and chicken.
Peachy.
Yeah, peachy.
Yeah, there's So, but actually, it goes further as well. Sometimes it's not only 2-syllable words. The only one I can think of right now is kind of a swear word. But what the hell? This is, again, it's very. When I first came to Korea, I thought it was hilarious. So I bought a slang book, a Korean slang book, and so I started using some of these words. My friends were like, "How do you know that word?" And I'm just like, it's in a book, and it's hilarious because I'm a foreigner who speaks almost no Korean, but I know that word. And the one of my favorite words that I still remember from the book, and if any Korean people are listening, this is definitely old slang. I mean, this book came out 15 years ago, so this is old slang at this point. But it was Yo Byung-chu, which translates to yogi. So yogi. Byo is Byung-shin, and Byung-shin, there's the swear word that basically means like retard. Yo Byung-chu, and chu is chugayo. So the way the swear works, it's yogi Byung-shin chugayo, yo Byung-chu, and it's one of my favorite slang words because it's basically saying insert. If you translate it, it's insert retard here. It's literally how it translates. Insert retard here. That's what chugayo means, like plus insert.
I feel a T-shirt coming on here, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite examples of a slang because it's just a weird swear word, and it's a good example of first syllable all crushed together to make a new word.
Jun
So
Nam
Korean is-
Ching, Jun Ya Ching.
Oh yeah, okay.
There you go.
Yeah, previous ex-girlfriend, ex-boyfriend.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John Yoja. Although, yeah, they tons of examples. So
yeah.
as you can see, and there's so many and there's so much English in Korean now that we'll start to see, and a lot of it like that honja time right there. So this is why my number one advice for anyone who's planning on spending any significant amount of time in Korea. I mean, even if you're going to be here 1 month, but 6 months, if you're going to be here on a 1-year contract, you should absolutely spend the time to learn Hangul, learn how to read the alphabet, because one, it's damn easy. I literally taught a friend how to read it in a day. I mean, you're not reading fast. You see the word hello and it's like hello, but you can read it, right? You can read anything out. And there's so much in Korea that's English, and especially food, menus and things like that. When I was new to Korea, I was just learning the alphabet, and I was out with a friend of mine. We were in some sushi restaurant, and he's like, "Here, read this." I was like, California roll, California roll. Oh, California roll.
Yeah.
And you just immediately know words,
Yeah,
foods, because
that's
so much.
something that's worth like reiterating twice. Like what Kevin's talking about is the utility of the written language.
Yeah.
If you don't know Korean language, knowing the written language, even if you're here for a quick trip, the written language, we could have a whole episode on Hangul. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will at some point.
It's we will topic. Off on this later, and if you're listening to this, you probably already know something about the written language because you're interested in Korea, but it's an engineered script. It's phonetic, and you can memorize the characters, and you can pretty much have it wrapped up on your flight on your way to Korea.
Right.
And so when you hit the ground, it's the reason it has a utility. You're probably thinking like, hey, why the heck would I learn an alphabet for a language I can't even hear and I can't even speak? And what Kevin's trying to describe is this phenomenon where so much stuff, especially food things, that's where you're going to be. If you're traveling, you're going to be hitting restaurants and cafes, and it's a huge part of your trip, anybody's trip. So much of that is English. So when you're looking at the Korean characters, they're actually spelling out English words, and you can read
so often.
It's kind of wild, actually.
It is wild. I one of my favorite games back in the day was to try to figure out the Korean title of the movie on OCN as you're flipping through the channels. They'll put the title of the movie in Korean.
Yeah.
And you're like, what movie is this? And then you're like, in Independence Day. Independence Day. You get it. And it's more fun than watching the movie. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the titles are just transliterated, I guess, right? Like in Hangul, right? Yeah,
not just foods, but movie titles. I mean, you just walk down the street and you look at signs around you, and it's just like there's so much random stuff. Like, I mean, even though they have words for, there's so many words that you'd be like lunchy set at Burger King, for example, or whatever. It's the lunch set of the meal. There's so much in English.
Yeah. And then in addition to the foodstuffs, and in addition to things, not just foodstuffs, but things that are words that are English being written in Korean. One of the other utilities of knowing the written script is that one thing that I guess I didn't think of when I learned how to read here was place names. So all of the places that are Korean, you're going to be using those when you're traveling, right? You're going to be using them in English. You're going to be, people writing notes, text, whatever, with English characters. Well, all of that is knowable. Again, like you can learn the alphabet on your flight, and then you have that much more control of what you're doing when you're here. It's really awesome.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, like I'll give you guys an example of what can happen if you don't do this. So when I came back for my second tour of duty in Korea, when I had come back, I basically spent the whole year not learning how to read it, and just my first year was just totally wasted. And so I came back, and I was staying in an area called Daebang-dong, Daebongdong is not far from our university, actually, the Seoul campus. Daebong, Shingil, Yeongdeungpo, it's all
It's just
on line.
southeast, right?
Yeah, it's all line number 1 on the south side of the Han River, but across from it's really close to Yeongdeungpo area.
West.
And I just looked at the romanized version, and I went to Itaewon, and then I stayed way too long, so I needed a taxi, and I go to the taxi driver, take me to Daebang Station, Daebang, Daebang, and they looked at me like, what? I sorry, sir, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, but it's Daebang, it's Daebang. I started getting about it, and somebody helped me. They were like, "Do you mean Daebong?" And I was like, "Yeah, it could be." And and I eventually got there, but yeah, I mean, it's just like,
I've heard so
really
many examples of, I mean, because I think we've even mentioned this once before, because there's Shinchon, which is near Hongdae, and there's Shinchon, which is near Gangnam. And I knew so many people when I was my first year, they're like, dude, it's Shinchon with an O sound, not Shinchon. Be very careful. It's not the O sound, because you're going to end up on the other damn side of the city.
Well,
and that taxi ride's going to cost you a lot of money.
It'll cost you 70,000 won, because I took that trip. Yeah. I said Shinchon, and they took me all the way to Shinchon. And then I looked outside and I was like, this doesn't look anything like Shinchon at all. I'm like, where am I? And the taxi driver's like, oh, Shinchon? I'm like, yeah, Shinchon. And he's like, you idiot, like in his mind, he didn't call me an idiot, but I was like, it's okay, I'll pay. Just take me back, and to the other place. And he took me to Shinchon.
Yeah, well, there
like
you go.
that's like a third utility I didn't think of. It's like another reason why you should knock out the alphabet on your flight on the way over, or before you get here.
Save you money.
Like in general, like if you want to be able to even just say anything in Korean, like if somebody gives you like directions, like, hey, I want you to go to this area. If you want to be able to pronounce things correctly, that's anytime you're traveling to any country, you're always using, often when I'm traveling, I'm writing down the local language using Roman characters. So like, I remember the first time I was going through Vietnam and Cambodia, I was writing down everything. They use Roman characters, right? But they have a system that I didn't understand, because it's a tonal language, right? So I'm just making my own type of notation. I'm inventing my own script. So even though they do use Roman script, this is totally unrelated, right? So I'm making my own. And you're just kind of bludgeoning your way through this and trying to remember how to say it right. Now, like Jack's mistake, it's hilarious that you got a tour of the country, as punishment for not knowing. But it's a really, beyond it just being for like safety, it's kind of awesome. Like, when Gangnam Style got really famous in America, you can still find people that refer to it as what? It's not Gangnam Style in America. They say Gangnam.
Gangnam,
right?
Yeah,
which is like, it's absolutely wrong, right? And if you listen to the frickin' song, you would know, because it doesn't say that. But it's really easy to know the right pronunciation if you know the alphabet, because it's a perfectly phonetic alphabet. So there's no phonetic definitions in Korean, right? Like in English, there's always a phonetic definition.
No, I think that Korea is a much more phonetic than English ever.
Right. But like if you look in a Korean definition of a word, like an English definition of a word always has a phonetic definition, is a phonetic code, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Korean, there just isn't anything, right?
I don't have a Korean dictionary. I probably should have one now that I think about it.
That's what I meant, like in a Korean dictionary, because the phonetic definition of a Korean word in a Korean to English dictionary will have the Roman phonetic code. But Hangul is so amazingly perfect that it practically doesn't need any phonetic definition. It is.
I see what you mean. Yeah, right.
The thing is,
it is almost.
There's a surprising amount of exceptions to that for words.
But
one of the words that was added is Hallyu, right? Hallyu, the Korean wave, and that's spelled Han-lyu. There's an HANLULYU, and those get merged. Even the word for thank you in Korean, right, is 감사합니다, but when you pronounce it, it's for 감사합니다.
Right.
So there is a lot.
Right, but those things, you could chalk that up to phonemic blending. So we can go off and talk about linguistics.
Which is what it is, but it does affect the pronunciation.
But phonemic blending is going to affect any language and any you can't say the word. You can say phone and you can say booth, but you can't say those two words together. If you put the two words together, you get phone booth. The N becomes an M. Phone booth. I mean, it's
no, it doesn't.
Phone
Not
booth.
my pronunciation. Phone booth with an N.
Phone booth. Booth. Yeah, you're breaking the two words. If you put it together, it becomes phone booth.
No, not the way I say it. Phone booth.
Of your tongue. All right, well, you can look it up later.
Right. Anyway, well, because you're saying the B is bilabial, so which
right?
the
It's
M
where
is
your tongue is. So he's saying two different words. He's saying two different words. If you say it as one word, you can't say the N. It turns into an M.
Right.
It's a really common example, actually, of phonemic blending. But in all languages, you're going to have something like that. My point was that if you're here and you want to be able to use Korean, or you're trying to like take notes for like a location place, like what would have saved Jack from a country tour, if he would have had the character, look, for real, if you could read the character, you can't mess up the pronunciation.
I know.
Like,
that's why I didn't complain, because I was like, I deserve it. I deserve the punishment. But I'll give you the conversely, like in Thailand, this happened to us too, you know, where you get in a taxi and we were going back to our hotel and we're like, take us to the Prantop hotel, Prantop apartment or something like that. And the guy is like, huh? And we're like, Prantop apartment. He's like, what? We go, Prantop apartment. Oh, Prantop apartment. It's like, what the hell did I just say 3 times? You know what I mean? Like you're gonna have that. I've had that, in when I lived in Daebang, I remember getting in the taxi with a friend of mine, a colleague, a coworker, and I said Hamilton Hotel, and the guy didn't know what I said. I'm like, Hamilton, Itaewon Hamilton, and he's like, what? Hamilton. Then I go, Hamilton, Hamilton or something. I said it really in a ridiculous way, and the guy goes, oh, Hamilton, okay, let's go. And so I mean, it's just it's frustrating, but I think if you do learn the Hangul pronunciation, your life will become a million times easier.
At the very least, with Hangul, one of the great things, even beyond like the phonetic sound and everything, it's the rhythm. So like that's a cool example Jack just made, like a hotel name. Okay, so that's pretty easy. You think like, hey, it's a hotel, it's a name of a thing, it's an international hotel chain. Come on, how's this guy not know this? But in Korean, you have the syllables, which are separated. But what's cool about Hangul is that you can see the syllables. So that's a huge piece of auditory information.
Right, because I should have said Ham-il-tan, right? Ham-il-tan or something like that. And I was just saying Hamilton. It just sounded like nonsense to the guy.
Yeah,
and, it makes sense to me now. Yeah.
I guess we are talking.
So along with
I don't know what.
With learning the alphabet.
Sorry.
This is going on. So along with learning the alphabet, there's just so many words that you'll start to hear in Korean as well, or in English as well, in Korean, right? And I'm sure you guys have just heard people speaking around you, and you're like, I understood what they just said, even though you don't actually know what they're saying. I think the best example of this for me, actually, it was not something that I understood, but I actually got to use this. I won a contest, not contest, kind of. I was out with my my diving team a bunch of years ago, and we were camping one night between diving sessions. And while we're hanging out by the fire, we're just drinking some soju and chatting. And almost everyone in the group, of course, speaks no English. It's all Korean. But one of the members, she spoke English quite well. She'd been abroad for a while. And so, as happens, because even though I spoke Korean, especially at the time, my English was still far better, of course. And her English was quite good. So I just, gravitated and ended up being her and I speaking English to each other for a while, just to chat. And finally, the other people in the group, they're just like, okay, this is bullshit. We can't understand what you're saying. Like, you can understand more or less what we're saying, but we can't understand at all what you guys are talking about. So new rule, they were like, no more English. Anyone who speaks English has to drink. That's the rule for the night. And I was like,
and then you said, okay, right?
And took a drink.
And then you took a drink.
But what was funny about this is that there's so much English in Korean, and this is where it's weird to know if it's Konglish or if it just is part of the language at this point, that I ended up winning this game. And what I mean by winning in this case was not drinking. I ended up telling them to drink all night because I'm very conscious of what words I'm speaking, because my Korean was still not very good at the time. And so I know exactly what I'm saying, and they're just just speaking normal Korean, and they're throwing out random words. They're like, like I said, we were camping, and so like, oh, I'm gonna go to my tent really quick, and I was like, tent? You just said tent? Like, that's an English word. And they're just like, what? That's English? I was like, yeah, that's English. Drink. And I'm like, shit. And so they would drink, because there is a Korean word for tent as well. And so there were so many examples of that throughout the course of the night where they were using English words that they didn't even realize were English. And I'm sure you guys have run into this, right? You've had students before, and there's like, teacher, how do you say this in English? And they'll tell you some word, and you're like, dude, that is English. And they're like, wait, what? Like, that's an English word.
Yeah, it's deeply embedded. I just looked this up before the podcast because it's something that I've mentioned in a couple of times in classes and lecture, and I reference Wikipedia and I say, hey, this is something I've seen on Wikipedia. I don't know.
I think you've mentioned it here once or twice before as well.
Yeah, the 5%. So I looked it up just to quote it. So it says, because of such a prevalence of English in modern South Korean culture and society, lexical borrowing is inevitable. English-derived Korean Konglish is increasingly used. The vocabulary of South Korean dialect of the Korean language is roughly, the vocabulary of South Korean dialect of the Korean language is roughly 5% loan words, excluding Chinese vocabularies. So that's pretty much English. 5%. That seems a large, I think, compared to like from and that's probably like mostly English, I guess. Is that what they're saying? Yeah,
that would be interesting to know what it was, because like I was saying at the beginning, I mean, there used to be a lot of Japanese that was coming into Korean, and at this point it's mostly English, though. And I mean, it's definitely gonna be a large majority English, but there are some weird examples of German or French words actually in Korean as well, which I don't understand where those came from.
Atobai, like part-time job, is German.
Arbeit. I don't know how to say it, and I don't know the German word, but yeah, I think in German it's like Arbeit. I don't speak German. Ich spreche kein Deutsch. Sorry, my German friends. So yeah, Arbeit is German. The word for a pub here, they say Hof. That's German. Do you guys know, this is a one that threw me off. My wife, when we were traveling, she wanted to buy a music box, and we're speaking Korean with each other, and she's like, oh yeah, I want to buy that. Do you guys know the word I don't know how to say it. I think it's from French, and the Korean pronunciation is orgol. It's like ORGOL, I think. Have you ever heard that? What? So that's how you say music box.
I don't know.
That's how you say music box in Korean.
I would just say
that's not a Korean word.
Box.
Right. No, but orgol comes from French, so there's French words in Korean as well for random things.
Well, here's the thing about English is that we have
most of it's
more than 10,000. We have tens of thousands of French words in English.
Oh, right.
I mean, if you go back to the Norman invasion of England, meant the influx of just tens of thousands. Like all of our food words are French, right? We don't say cow meat. We say beef, which is boeuf, which is French.
I read somewhere that the overlap of, if you take if you have Venn diagram, like the total words in English and the total words in French, you have a 60% overlap.
Wow.
In vocabulary.
Even our alphabet, like the ja in vision, like that, that's a French sound,
Right. And this is kind of like a wow that I get from my students when I introduce the idea, and I get some disbelief. And so I pull up something on the overhead, like again, just Wikipedia, whatever, just grab a page, and I flip it to French. And 99% of your students have very little exposure to French.
Right.
And I'm like, all right, guys, we're going to try to read this. Let's see what happens. And it's pretty funny. So these are students that are learning English, but they're actually able to grab, they can figure out what a paragraph is about, and it's in French. And it's like, okay, why is that happening? How are you guys figuring that out?
Right.
And then it gets really crazy if you try to pronounce it to them, because they can't hear any of it.
Well, do you think the dynamic, the reason that Korea has absorbed these English words is not just globalism, but maybe also the fact of the American military presence, from the Korean War? I mean, do you think that's where a lot of those words, and then their very fast development and relationship with, let's say, the U.S. military presence here is what kind of brought those words into the lexicon?
I think that's where we're going to get the start of it. I mean, Korea, the U.S. had a lot of soldiers here, plus the U.S. just had a big influence by basically saving Korea in the war, and so they were always like, go America, and so there was just so much English coming into the language. And so, I mean, we have a lot of words in Korean that there is no Korean word for, right? Like computer in Korean is computer, right? So that's just the English Korean word.
But the word, but
And that's
in Thai, it's also computer, you know, like it's the same. It's
right. But then if you look at like words, I mean, French is the classic example, but I think North Korean, they don't use the word ice cream like Korean does, ice cream, but they have their own word for ice cream because they want to keep it pure Korean. And I would assume that computer might be the same. I don't speak North Korean, so I don't know offhand.
Right.
So this is where I think things get really interesting when you look at Korean and Konglish. And I always find it weird to define Konglish because I don't consider computer or the word bus, for example, again in Korean, bus, I don't consider that Konglish. The word for computer in Korean is computer. That's just Korean.
Yeah. And
right?
and also this dynamic that you're describing, I think when you're talking about language in general, is like you could try to control it, but it's such an organic bottom-up phenomenon. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Like it's just these things are just language is just and it shifts and it
yeah, it's language is about as steady as a river. I mean, it's just
exactly
changing, and the more you get, the more granular you get. Like I had a Zoom meeting today with one of my students that's studying English Lang Lit, and she's at that level of study, super granular, you know, and she's looking for these answers for these definitive principles of grammar and the way that words are derived. And it's like, yeah, okay, like I can agree with Kevin, like, yeah, bus, okay, that's definitely not a loan word. I mean, that's because buses, etc. But you know, why don't we use the word car? Yet we use taxi, but we don't say car, we say cha. And that's like, well, cha is actually a wagon, like pojamacha, you know, like there's, you know, horse-drawn wagon is
and
matcha.
why do we get in the car but we get on the plane? You know, I don't see a lot of people hanging on top of a plane. But you know, like this whole the whole idea of grammar being like some sort of like codified and immutable force is just nonsense. You know, it may be true for the Sunung, but if the community of speakers agree that it's okay to say that, it's okay to say that. Don't worry, you're fine. You know, and I think that we get confused between grammarian English and like what's the population of speakers and how do they use the language? And I
think linguists actually have they create a definition for that. Like, so when things kind of fracture like that, so like if the three of us started using novel grammar, right? But we're just kind of like breaking the rules and we're breaking them in three different ways. That's not a language. That's not a dialect because they're all different. But if we're doing it all the same way, that means that we kind of developed our own dialect, I think.
Pigeon language?
I think I'm not sure. I think pigeon is when
a pigeon and a Creole would be like two different languages, kind of a trading language, right? Like they're these two, you know,
code switching. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
But what we're talking about is, well, here's an example that I hear all the time is like, you know, that, you know, if you have like a compound noun or whatever at the end of a sentence, you say, I have to say there are 2 cars. There are many people at the party, you know, but what do we say when we're talking? We say, oh, there's a lot of people at the party. There's a lot of people. There is a lot of people. That's bad grammar. But I guarantee you that most native speakers would say there's a lot. And the whole reason is that we would say that is because it's a hell of a lot easier to say there's a lot than it is to say there are a lot. That's a mouthful, you know? And so it's just like water. It just, you know,
and so let's bring this back to Korean as well, because there's so much.
I love nerding out on this crap, so I'm sorry. This is right in my wheelhouse. So yeah.
But there's in Korean, so like we were saying, I think a lot of it does come from, you know, like that influence at the beginning and that globalization, that English. And well, now it's just because so many Korean people just speak English that the words are just becoming part of what they use. I mean, you turn on the news in Korean and it's news. But my favorite example of code switching in Korean, because so many young people in Korea speak Korean. I mean, really, if you're listening, if you come to Korea, if you ever get lost on the streets, if you're in Seoul, look for a young person, and odds are they will speak some general Korean or some English, sorry, to be able to help you out. But my favorite example of code switching was a bunch of years ago. I was on the bus going home, not really paying attention, but, you know, there was just some kids speaking behind me, and suddenly one of them says to the other, "Senyu beri kamsa." And I was like, what did he just say? Thank you. That's my favorite. I love that one.
Thank you
very kamsa. And it's because everyone in Korea, well, not everyone, but most people, and especially young people in Korea, will know the word thank you very much. You know, they know that phrase because they've learned it since they were a kid. So thank you very much. So they take that thank you very much and add their own kamsahamnida, thank you, in Korean, and they blend those together. And I love that one. That's my favorite. But there's so much code switching that even older people do. Like in Korea, everyone, almost, even old people, will know the word no, N-O, in English, right? And so there's a lot of no words in Korean. No jam, that's not fun. You know, no dap, that's a wrong answer. There's a new campaign for non-smoking. It's the no dambe, no cigarette campaign. I mean, a bunch of years ago, we were out with my mother-in-law. We were about to do some zip lining on one of our vacations. We went to Cambodia, and she gets up to the top, and we strap her in. And suddenly, and I've never heard a word of English come out of her mouth before. Suddenly, she starts going, no. So even old people know the word no, right? And that's where so much of Korean is just pulling these words in, because young people speak the language, and it's young people that really make the changes into the language as well. And so the changes that they're making are English based.
And it's the I would say a lot to do with like the entertainment culture, the Hollywood.
Sure.
You just have a lot of experience. You're listening to a lot of English. One of my favorite is sogeting. Which is like, I guess, would be blind dating. Yeah, I find that my students will use the gerund, will overuse the gerund, you know, like I going to the store, and it's no, you know, either you go to the store or you are going to the store, but you're not I going to the store is not acceptable.
So dating is a cool example, because that's not even, that's a really fun one as well, because it's using English grammar with Korean vocabulary, right? It's not pulling the grammar in. It's the English grammar.
What's the word? What's the so part? I forget what that.
Oh, it's soge hada.
Soge is meet, right? Or introduce.
Yeah,
introduce.
to meet, to introduce. Yeah, and then the ting. So it basically means introducing or meeting. You know, like to translate it literally. And so soge ting is it's a blind date. You're introducing someone to someone else.
Yeah,
is a soge ting. And so that's a fun one as well. And then then you start getting into where they completely break the word. So if the way I like to talk to my students is when I do like speaking tests and things, I'm like, look, you have to be careful, because I understand Korean, I understand Konglish. And so when you're speaking to me, it's different. And I'm you know, for the test, I'm grading you differently, because you have to imagine that you're talking to my mom, right? My mom doesn't understand all of these crazy Korean words and Korean grammars that you're pulling. So like, do you guys know the word mental bunge, menbung in Korean? Have you heard that? Menbung? You've probably heard menbung. It basically means like your brain is fried. And because what it means is mental. Now that word, they're using it very strangely here, of course, but mental is an English word, and then bunge is basically just like thunder or lightning. And so what I tell my students, I'm like, that word, like mental, my mom she wouldn't be able to guess what that actually means, because it's half English, half Korean, but she would hear the mental and be like, oh, there's English, I can catch that. But then that word no longer that's not how Korean people say it. They say menbung. They do what we were talking about earlier, and putting it together. So that's an English word that's not even English anymore in Korean.
I got another one for you. Glamour. Glamour in Korean is an adjective that means voluptuous, because I was teaching, I teach that, like glamour would be like an S line, large hips and large breasts or whatever, that kind of that body shape in a female. And my students, but I tried to explain to them, like, no, glamour is a noun.
Glamorous.
Glamorous is an adjective, and it means like regal and
right.
like it and they just, but they've just taken this word and they just said, I'm going to change the part of speech. I'm going to change it to an adjective, and I'm going to change the meaning completely. So, and I don't care, you know. And so they'll do that kind of stuff. And I find, I mean, it doesn't bother me. It's just, I just find it kind of interesting how some of these get, like your exact same example you said before, is they've taken this word, given it a totally different meaning. It's English, but the connection to the original meaning is gone.
So then you have makes you really wonder, like this stat saying that Korean has 5% loan words mostly from English. Is it taking into account something like that? Probably not. I mean, I don't know how they derive that number, but when you consider all of the ways that the words are, you know, you're taking one part that's English, one part that's Korean, stripping it down and smashing it together, and it's a new thing. Like, is that a loan word now? Like, you know,
well,
or
let me ask you this question. Would you advise your student who's going to study in America to ask their, you know, dorm room, their roommate, you know, have you seen my panties? You know, it's like, you probably,
right. So
right. You're going to freak that person out. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Or like the example Kevin's making, where it'd be like, maybe not even intelligible, most likely not intelligible. So it's not an English word anymore, but that portion's loaned from it. Or certain, like, you know, parts of grammar being stolen, but, you know, modified. So I think it's a lot more.
It's really fascinating how much English has come in and the ways it's come in. That's where I like to think about it. Like, what is English in the language? What's Konglish? How do you define Konglish? And what's just Korean in it? So for me, the word computer, I don't think that's Konglish. I think that's just Korean. That's just, I mean, it's a loan word, but it is just Korean. Konglish might be maybe even Sogeting, like you were saying, that might be Konglish because they're bringing in that grammar. But then you've just got, and then you've just got proper English that's still in the words as well, like the word for news, for example, because there are words for news in Korea. You don't have to say news, but when you turn on the nightly news, it says, you know, 9 o'clock, 9시 news. It says news in that case. And so that's where I think it's just proper English.
Yeah, I agree.
That's just
they're just borrowing that word, but the meaning is the meaning retains the same meaning. It's used in the same, essentially the same grammatical, you know, position in the sentence, although the syntax is different between the two languages, but it still serves the same function. But I think it's when we get into, but even Sogeting is a weird one, is kind of gray, because you're using it's a Korean word. So I you know, trying to pin down the exact definition of what Konglish is exactly. Maybe Konglish is the best example of a Konglish word. Like the word Konglish, you know, like might be
English with English.
Right.
It's like Spanglish, you know, it's the same. Like I remember growing up learning Spanglish, growing up in Arizona. And it's the same thing. So for me, that's my definition of Korean Konglish and English in Korean, basically. That's how I define it. But even still, it's not a strict definition. There's some words where a student will be like, is this English Korean? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think that's Konglish anymore. I think that's just become Korean at this point. That's just the way it works.
Have you ever heard of an effort to reform some important words? So again, still on Wikipedia, looking at this, they're saying that there's words that appear to be imported into Korean via Japanese, which Kevin, you were speaking about earlier, right? And many English words introduced via Japanese pronunciation have been reformed. So like the word melon in Korean is melon, and it was once called in Korean meron. So it was a single leo. And so they doubled it. So it became melon. And it was meron.
Oh, meron changed to melon. Okay.
Yeah, so because it was considered like a mispronunciation, so it's a little closer to the English. I never heard anything like this, like an actual effort. Like I've heard of, like, you know, how the romanization system shifted around.
Right,
like
Pusan to Busan. Like I remember when that was being, you know, negotiated and stuff like that.
Signs changing or having to. When I first came here, but still some of that stuff around.
Korea sometimes spelled with a C, C-O-R-E-A, you know, every once in a while French. I'll see that too.
That's French, I'm pretty
is that
sure.
a French thing? Oh, okay.
I heard, although I don't know if this is true at all, there was this is before I even came to Korea, actually. There was a Korean restaurant in my hometown and it's a small town, so not very many foreign food restaurants, but there was a Korean place and it was called Korea House with a C. And I remember asking the owner, and they're like, why'd you spell it with a C? And he said, and I don't know how accurate this is, but he said that the K was spelled that way because of like Japan's influence. And so K comes after J in the alphabet, whereas Korean
I
people
heard
want
that
it
too.
spelled with a
Yeah.
C. I have no idea how true this
is.
Yeah.
But
that's a better story. I like that better.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I'll tell you guys a funny. Do you got any like funny stories? Because there was a bar in Pyeongtaek this is way back 15 years ago, 16 years ago, and the bar was called Venus. I mean, the English name was Venus, but the Korean spelling, instead of using the B, which would be like Venus, they used the P sound.
Because,
so it was
because there's no
peanut,
V in
it
Korean.
was penis bar. Yeah. So
that's amazing.
Really inverts that name. It just turns it right around. Right.
Right, yeah. I'm
Fantastic.
not sure I want to. Yeah. The thing that do you guys ever do this? Like I like to kind of blow my students' minds by saying like we'll count syllables in words sometimes, and so I'll write the word friend and say, like how many syllables are in this, and they'll look at it and they'll say like, oh, friend, oh, three syllables, and I'm like, no, it's got one syllable, friend, and so a lot of the English words that are in Korean are pronounced using that. I don't know what you'd call those phonemes or those little pieces of Korean.
I have an entire lesson based on this that I've shared with a bunch of people talking about haikus and stuff. And my favorite example of the Korean pronunciation for a word, because Korean adds extra syllables based on the way that consonants go together in Korea, basically. Mm-hmm. But my favorite example is the word nice in English, and how many syllables is that in English?
Yeah,
it's one, right?
One,
but,
yeah.
But in Korean, it's three, nice, and I love that one because so I mean, you'll be out like playing pool, right, with your buddies, and you'll hear some ajashi, some old dude next to you, and they like make a good shot, and they're like nice, and they really get into that third syllable, and I love that third syllable in Korean. But what makes this word even better for me is my first year here in Korea, a buddy I knew, is a Canadian dude. He did like the 1 year tour in Korea, maybe 2, and he was going back to Canada. And he was like, okay, I'm done with Korea, but I loved it. I had a fantastic time here. I want something to remember my time here in Korea.
Oh my God, okay, did he get a tattoo that said nice?
He got a tattoo on his left arm, going down, nice. And I'll never forget when he came in. He told me he went to, and this was back in the day when getting a tattoo.
Awesome. How much did it cost to get that lasered off 2 years later? Yeah.
But I remember he told me when he went into the tattoo shop to get it done, which at the time they're like tattoo shops weren't really a thing here in Korea. It was like just some random shop, and he was like, "I want to get the word nice tattoo," and the tattoo artist was like, "No, you don't." He's like, "No idea." He's like, "No,
nobody wants that."
Yeah. I was like, why do you want to get the word nice? It's like, but yeah, so he has the word nice, and if anybody knows a Canadian dude with a nice tattoo, tell him to email me.
Hey, that's a nice tattoo. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's all you can say about that. Is. Yeah.
And so
yeah.
I mean, is there anything else you guys want to add to
I just have one more like kind of a funny anecdote. Is we in our coffee shop we have a Hey Kakao. Do you guys know what that is? It's like Kakao's version of Alexa. And so if I want to listen to like the Beatles or something, and I back home with the Amazon one, I just say like, oh, I want to listen to Penny Lane by the Beatles. But you have no idea how many times I've gotten in just absolute screaming fits with this stupid freaking Kakao thing, because it's like I want to listen to some Christmas music, and I'm like, Christmas umak telaju, like play this, and the Kakao's like, sorry, I don't understand, and I have to say it again. And it's just hilarious to listen to me just fighting with this freaking AI that because my pronunciation is just so terrible. But
and I guess that's a good example of it's a good way to bring us back to what we were talking about before. We're learning the alphabet just really does help your understanding of both spoken, it helps you be understood and to understand, because you understand how the syllables work and how the language works, because there's so much English in the language. There really is. There's 5%, if not more. That almost, I mean, that sounds like a huge number, but sometimes when I'm watching TV, it almost seems low. Like sometimes it almost seems that there's more English. Yeah. But if you don't know how to pronounce it, or if you don't know what people are saying, even though they're speaking English to you, it's going to go over your head. And learning that alphabet, learning Hangul, which again, like that Brian said, I think, and it's no exaggeration, you can learn it on the plane. Not well, but you'll learn it. You'll know the gist of the language.
And then once you do, it's kind of fun to just read the signage, you know? I mean, it's really
that
like
was my goal when I first came to Korea.
Yeah. You'll see English.
That's how I learned. Yeah.
It's like the Matrix. You'll start to see all these English words just popping out at you everywhere that look like just nonsense. And you'll realize, oh my God, this is, you know, what percent of signs do you think are written in Korean but have English words? I mean, maybe half.
A surprising amount.
Yeah, just a ton, right?
More than you would guess. More than 5%. I'd be
more than 5%. Yeah.
Like if you go to a cafe, the menu. If you look at a menu in a cafe, restaurant, you know, it's pretty much all of it, unless it's like, of course, Korean food, but then you're there to have that Korean food, so you know what it is. Like if you're looking for tteokbokki, you don't have to have the English translation. You can just read tteokbokki. If you're looking for, you know, gamjatang, it's going to say gamjatang. You can read it.
Yep. Yeah. So it's fascinating. And if you come here, you'll experience so much random English, and you'll be like, wait, did they say what I think they said? And maybe they did, but maybe it doesn't mean what you think it means, basically. So anything else to add here?
I think we hit it.
I think we that was awesome, Kev. Thanks, man. That was awesome.
It's a fascinating topic. Yeah, it's really cool. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Do we want to tell them where to find us?
You can hit us up at our website, which is thesoulpatch.com. Just remember,
send us an email.
And send us an email at thesoulpatch@gmail.com. Yeah, absolutely. And you can find everything on our website, thesoulpatch.com. So, and if you can find it in your hearts to give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts, that will really, help us with the algorithms and move us up. Yeah. All right. Awesome.
Good night,
Thanks, guys.
I like to pay total respect to the people that made me what I am today.
Docking gear. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. The quiet man. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. Dopamine. Jim. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. The brain. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. Hey Bobby, let the bass go. Call me an eater, call me a dominant.